My name is Hanin Ghaddar. I'm the Friedmann Fellow at the Washington Institute. And today's episode of Middle East Matters is going to discuss the recent movement on the issue of normalizing with Assad. A lot has been happening in the region in the past 2 months on the issue of returning Assad to the Arab League and also how Arab states can start normalizing with Assad after years of boycotting. It started with Jordan a while ago, with Syrian and Jordanian delegations visiting both countries and discussing mainly energy issues and Captagon trade, which is hurting Jordan a lot. Today, there are reports that Saudi Arabia is going to extend an invitation for Assad to visit Saudi Arabia after he visited the United Arab Emirates. And this whole delegation will probably discuss Assad's return to the Arab League and what that means for Syria, the Arab world, and the Arab League. Today, we are going to discuss the implications of the normalization with Assad, what it means for him to return to the Arab League, the US policy implications, and what it means for the Syrians. To talk about all these issues, I welcome my colleague Andrew Tabler, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute and a former Syria director at the National Security Council. I also welcome Washington-based analyst, Syria analyst, Ahed al Hendi, who was also a political prisoner in Syria. Thank you both for joining us. Let's talk about this. Andrew, this is normalization with Assad has been going on for a very long time, right? It started a while ago with Jordan, when the Jordanian government and the Assad government exchanged delegations to talk about energy issue, but also the Jordanians, we know that they were mostly concerned about Captagon, which is also the main concern of the Arab countries today. So we saw this, and we saw two things. One, that the Captagon issue has not been resolved, and two, the US didn't really push back a lot then, and maybe this have allowed other Arab states to keep going. And maybe my question to you is that, do you expect the US today to push more on this? Now everyone is joining the chorus. Or do you think that a US push would change anything at this point? So what's the US policy implication on this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So you're right. Efforts to engage with Assad are not new. There was the Jordanian/Egyptian track over energy, moving gas and electricity from Jordan to Lebanon, with Assad taking a stake in that. That didn't go anywhere. They did open the Jabr crossing, and Jordan was flooded with Captagon produced inside of Syria among the networks, the criminal networks that are increasingly getting into the news, right? That's not something that I think the Jordanians or anyone else wanted, and now the Arab countries are suffering from it. But there was a second track always in the background, and that's the United Arab Emirates.
Yes, that's true.
In particular, going back to 2018, wanted to essentially provide monetary inducements and engagement in a way to Assad in return for various things. Some of it was undermining Turkey and Qatar, which they were at loggerheads with then in the Gulf Rift, which has somewhat been eased to a certain extent. But then later on, it became part of an argument for supposedly getting Iran out of or drawing down from inside of Syria.
Right.
And so therefore, these carrots, so to speak, big carrots would be lined up. Standing in the way of that are U.S. sanctions. And this is where it becomes, the U.S. position becomes kind of a mystery. As you noted, throughout the Biden administration, they have not paid attention to Syria. They have not made it a priority issue. And so because of that, the Arab countries were reading that engagement was possible. That's why the Jordanians were ahead. But they still stayed back because they were cautious until the February 6th earthquake. Suddenly, the U.S. issues a general license without defining what earthquake relief entails for 6 months, which is double the time of the usual general licenses for such situations.
Interesting.
The Arab countries read it as a green light, and many have stepped in to engage with Assad.
Do you really think this is a green light?
I think that it was a green light.
Maybe it is.
I think it was an amber light or a yellow light, as we would say.
Yeah.
I think, and this happens. Our government is not monolithic. Some people want, I think, a better Arab engagement with Assad to try and lure him away from the Iranians and to settle the Syrian war. I think the problem, though, is there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And walking the path of engaging with Assad has a horrendous track record by the United States and by the Arab countries. And that led to the current situation that we're in.
Yeah.
What I think is missing from the entire discussion, and I'm sure Ahed has feelings on this as well, is, okay, so you're engaging with Assad, so what's on the table exactly?
Exactly.
Like, how's this going to work? Because US sanctions aren't going away. And so I think that's very important. That's a great question mark.
Yeah, we're going to get to that immediately after I ask Ahed about the other side of the equation, which is Assad, right? So today, a lot of these normalization activities that are going on in the region, starting with Jordan, UAE, and today with Saudi, a lot of it has to do with Captagon, right? All the Captagon that is going into the Gulf and really making causing a concern in Gulf countries and Jordan. This trade, illicit trade, is getting Assad billions of dollars. So do you think that this kind of normalization would give the return that the Arab states are looking for in terms of Captagon? And do you think Assad would actually let go of that money? And if that's the case, if Assad is not going to let go of all the money coming to him from Captagon and the Arab states are not going to resolve anything doing this, do you think this normalization would last eventually, if this is the case?
Well, it doesn't look that Assad is going to let this revenues let go. I mean, like, they are generating up to $5 billion. In a country like Syria, where Assad now lost control of all the natural resources, all the oil fields now are not under Assad control. The water resources, the agricultural resources are all not under Assad control. Most of the revenue that used to come from manufacturing is now, it doesn't exist anymore. All the factories were destroyed, or many manufacturers moved out of the country. So Assad turned Syria now into a big Captagon lab. It's generating a lot of income. He has a big network of suppliers, dealers that are transferring these Captagons to many Arab countries. So unless there is a solution for Assad to generate money, I mean, like, you would not let go. And I don't see any other solution. I mean, like, and when we have sanctions as well, I mean, like Kaiser sanctions, the US made it clear, the U.S. Congress made it clear that Kaiser sanction is still in place, Caesar Act still in place. And I mean, there's no way that Assad regime would be able to get money from Arab countries. So I would think this is a wishful thinking that Assad would stop the Captagon trading, where it's generating a lot of money. And we see, I mean, like, in the time when the Jordanians, when the Emiratis were engaging with Assad, the authorities in the UAE discovered a lot of shipments coming from Syria, full of Captagon. So that would not stop Assad. Same thing, I mean, like, when Assad used to export terrorism, I mean, like, support groups in different Arab countries. I mean, all of these Arab countries tried to engage with Assad, thinking that in this way they would make Assad stop doing all of these activities. But it never worked. I mean, knowing the history of Syria.
So this whole, so this is to both of you, knowing that these sanctions are still set in place, except for the humanitarian relief of the earthquake, which could be a way of getting some money inside. This is what people fear today, that, like, Arab countries might use this leeway of the humanitarian aid and earthquake relief to send Assad some money. But that aside, do you, both of you, like, let's start with Andrew, what do you think of the whole idea of Assad going back to the Arab League? There will be a vote of the 22 countries to bring Assad back, yes or no. Some countries are still opposed, but if there's kind of, the vote works and Assad goes back to the Arab League, which is something that he wants, but not the only thing that he wants. Some think it's symbolic, some think it has more, further implications. So what do you think of that?
So the Arab League is not an executive body. It is a regional body whose votes carry a certain amount of political weight to the international community. It shows the degree of Arab unity on a certain issue. So to readmit Syria only requires a majority vote. It doesn't have to be consensus. But of course, the leaders of the Arab League want consensus, because if it's not unanimous, then it's meaningless.
Yes.
The people who want to normalize with Assad want a unanimous vote, so they can go to the rest of the world and say, "See, we need to take a different path." And they believe that will, I think, translate differently in the sanctions space.
I see.
On the timing, it's interesting. It's not just, I think, taking advantage of the earthquake relief. The Caesar sanctions, which are in place because of the Assad regime's atrocities, Caesar being the code word for the regime photographer, brave man who took the photos that were smuggled out, that led to these unprecedented sanctions with secondary effects. These sanctions sunset in 2024. So there would have to be a reintroduction of those measures on the Hill, another vote. Given the sentiments of Congress, I think that's all but assured. But it could be that the Arabs believe that they could make a play to somehow change this all before 2024.
So it could have an implication if they get a lot of votes.
It could have an implication. It could be one of many steps in a very difficult, fraught process to bring about the sanctions relief that would require, that would be required to really bring the kind of reconstruction to Syria that Assad wants.
Exactly. So based on this question, and you can talk about this, Ahed, I realized something. There was a report, and maybe you can confirm it, or if you know more about it, is that the Saudis are planning to give the Hajj license back to the Syrian regime and take it away from the opposition coalition, the opposition people. So this will have an implication on the Syrians who live outside Syria, who have Syrians who do not have any relation with the regime, refugees. Does that mean that the Syrian people will have to deal with Assad now because of these little details, like the Hajj license is one of them? But there might be others where, like the Syrian people might have to deal with this, with the regime. Forget about the national community. Let's talk about the Syrians as well. What does that mean? Do you think this is something to be concerned about?
Well, we heard a lot of reports now. It's obvious that the Saudi Arabia is trying to engage with Assad. I mean, like, it's not only with Assad. If we look even at Yemen, I mean, like the next door neighbor of Saudi Arabia, just here the Saudis were trying to assassinate top Houthi leaders, and now they're shaking hands with them. So, I mean, like this policy of rapprochement of the Saudis with their adversaries. And I would say this, I mean, like what contribute to that as well is the less American engagement in the region, which put many Arab countries to deal with their problems on their own. So this part of a symbolic gestures that I mean, like all of these Hajj, people who want to do Hajj and live outside of Syria, and refugees, I mean, like they use passports that are foreign passports, not Syrian passports. So these are more of a symbolic gestures that it helped Assad. Assad wants this to talk to his constituencies, to circle of supporters who give up, who are struggling now because of the economical problems, who are really living under poverty lines. I mean, like the income of the Syrian now is less than $20 per month. So he's just giving them fake hopes, telling them like, look, the Saudis are normalizing with us. The Saudis want us to be back in the Arab League. All of these countries that supported the Syrian opposition, that armed the Syrian opposition, that closed their embassies in Syria, they are back now. They want to talk to me. And this was the narrative of Assad from day one. He was always saying that all of these Arab countries, they are speaking against us in public while talking to us under the table, which was not true. So basically, this would help Assad with his circle of supporters. But is it really help Assad to come back to what Syria was before 2011? It's impossible now. I mean, like, look at the situation in the country. I mean, we have different states within Syria now. I mean, look at the Northeast. I mean, like, you have American diplomats flying in, even Emiratis, even the Emiratis who are trying to normalize with Assad regime. I mean, they have forces. They have in Northeast Syria, and these forces are considered by Assad regime as occupation forces. They have been in Syria without the permission of the Syrian government or the Syrian regime. Look at the Northwest. I mean, same thing. I mean, like, what level of control does Assad have there? So all of that would help Assad only to pass time, but in reality, I mean, nothing would change on the ground. I mean, like. True that yes, the opposition was not able to capture Damascus, but Assad would no way capture Syria back like it was before 2011. So it's all symbolic gestures. I don't see them as they would really bring anything to Assad.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Andrew, final question for you. Do you think this will have any implication on the presence of the US troops in Syria?
Yes, there is. So US troops in Syria are legally in Syria based on an Article 51 request, self-defense request of the Iraqi government. And that request allows for US troops to be in that neighboring country to combat ISIS. The Russians, the Iranians, and the Assad regime want the US out of Syria. Now, this is not something that would happen right away, I think, but it could set in motion. We talked about this Arab consensus. If there is an Arab consensus and the Iraqis are in favor of engaging with Assad, you could have a situation where, in the not too distant future, there's Arab pressure for the US to leave and to perhaps force a deal between Assad and the SDF. And that would do a lot of things. I think, it would give a lot of the country back to Assad, at least legally, but also it would almost certainly perpetuate the life of ISIS, because none of the conditions that led to the uprising and the revolution have been solved in Syria. So that would only lead to a regeneration, and as we know, every time it comes back, it's twice as thick.
On this depressing note, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure this is a topic that will keep going, and I'm sure we'll come back to it at one point and look at everything that happened in the Arab League meeting and everything else. We will come back to it. Hopefully it will not be as bad as it looks. Thank you both for joining us, and have a good rest of the afternoon.